What is social health?
So social health I define as the dimension of our overall health and well-being that comes from human connection. So typically the way that we talk about health, the sort of predominant narrative in our society today, focuses on physical health and mental health, right? So thinking about how we can strengthen our bodies and how we can strengthen our minds. But there's so much research at this point showing that relationships are as much a part of our health, as much of a determinant of our longevity as having a healthy body and mind, that we need to elevate that other dimension, that social health dimension, and recognize that health is not just physical and mental, it's also social. And the World Health Organization has for many decades defined health as physical, mental, and social well-being. But we've really overlooked and kind of forgotten about that third dimension, that third aspect, that social piece. And I believe that that is the cause of a lot of suffering, right? There's a lot of worrisome trends about people feeling lonely or having fewer friends than they did in the past, not belonging to as many communities. And we need to begin recognizing that that relational part of our life is as much a determinant of our health as exercising, eating healthy foods, getting a good night's sleep, and really prioritizing it and structuring our lives around that.
Is that feeling of loneliness, is that the kind of opposite of optimal social health?
That's a great question. No, it's one piece. I love that you asked that. So loneliness is the mismatch between how much connection you want and how much you're actually getting, right? So feeling lonely means you don't feel like you have those people who you can reach out to for support. But loneliness is just one sign of poor social health, right? So a lot of people don't feel lonely, and yet there are other ways that they could be more socially healthy. So for example, maybe you have really close friends and you spend time with your family, but at work, you don't feel really connected to your coworkers, or in your community, you don't have kind of a group or a sense of affinity with the place where you live, right? There's other dimensions to being socially healthy than just the absence of loneliness. In the same way that being physically healthy, it's not just about not being obese, right? That's just one aspect. You also need to get a quality sleep at night and eat nutritious foods and so on. So just like physical health is multidimensional, our social health is as well. And so loneliness can be one indication that something's off, but there are other signs of it as well.
Social health might be a new term for many of the listeners, but maybe they've heard of social determinants of health. How are those two things different from one another?
Yes. So social determinants of health is this term commonly used in public health and healthcare that's talking about the environmental influences on our health. So for example, access to housing and education and access to food in your community, access to healthcare, things like that in our culture, in the environment around you, the context where you live that are influencing your health. So it's social determinants, meaning contextual, versus social health, which is really about the relational component. And so social health could be considered one kind of social determinant, but it's so much more important than that. And when we get into some of the data, it's really remarkable how vital a role it is that we have meaningful connection. And so we need to elevate that aspect of it.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to dedicate your career to this, to kind of better understanding social health and then helping educate the world about it?
Yeah. So I came across this term when I was doing research over 10 years ago, back in 2013. I had a grant from Stanford University to develop this app and this digital campaign, taking research insights on human connection and making them practical and actionable for people to use in their everyday lives to help us all live more meaningfully connected lives at that stage. And as I was doing research, I came across this paper written in the early 1970s by a researcher named Robert D. Russell. And he was the first one to attempt to define social health. He noticed that the World Health Organization defines health as physical, mental, and social. And he said, well, what is that social piece? And I came across this paper, and it was such a light bulb moment for me. I mean, growing up, I took gym class in school, right? I learned a lot about how to be physically healthy growing up. In the media, looking around at newspapers and what was going on in influencers were talking about, everyone was talking about mental health. But social health, I had never even heard of this. And as I went to find more information about it, I couldn't find much. I mean, there were some research papers, some stuff online, not a lot. And even today, fast forward over a decade, there's still not a Wikipedia page about social health.
Is that because it's assumed that it's kind of that mental health covers relationships and social health?
I think that's a huge part of it. So typically when we talk about connection or loneliness, it's in the context of mental health. But in fact, it's so much more than that. So people who feel isolated or lonely have a higher risk of mortality, right? It's not just about mental health. It's not just about feeling connected makes you feel happy or improves your mood. This is literally changing the functioning of our bodies. It's reducing our risk for disease. It's improving our health outcomes. If we do have a diagnosis, it's helping us live longer. And so if connection gets lost in the conversation on mental health, we underappreciate how essential it is.
Is that one of the things that you think most surprises people about social health? Is that these connections, relationships that you have in your life have the ability to not only affect mood and mental health, but can manifest as physical symptoms, physical disease as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very surprising. I mean, to me, I'm still amazed at the research on longevity and connection, right? I mean, one of the seminal studies that looked at this back in the 70s followed about, I think it was around 7,000 people for 9 years. And they found that men who didn't have a strong community and social ties were twice as likely to die in that time period. And women were almost 3 times as likely to die. And that was regardless of their baseline health. That was regardless of the other health behaviors that they were doing. So if you're 2 or 3 times more likely to pass away in the next decade just because you lack meaningful connection, that's alarming. That means we need to take this very, very seriously.